Okay, hello and welcome to Mode Talk, the motorsports podcast. I'm here with my usual co-host Vince.
Hey guys.
And so the second episode, today we're going to talk mostly about the new F1 calendar and also some of our favorite tracks from the current calendar and maybe tracks we'd like to see back and just F1 tracks in general. But as always, we'll start with a little bit of the recent racing news. Vince, do you want to start? What was the big thing this weekend?
This weekend we had the Formula One Grand Prix out at Silverstone, and we also had the V8 Supercars out at Townsville over the weekend. The Formula One race this weekend was a nice surprise, being out at Silverstone, having McLaren do really, really, really well with their new upgrades that came through. Caught some people off guard. Coming second and fourth with, the usual suspect, Verstappen coming in first and Hamilton coming in third. The comments from those drivers were that the McLaren was a rocket ship and caught them off guard. What was your thoughts, Mike?
I mean, the drivers kind of had it right, didn't they? The McLaren was just quick. There's no other way to say it. They were just really quick this weekend, which is good to see. I'm not a McLaren fan. I've never really followed McLaren much, but I do like seeing teams like McLaren and Williams, some of the older teams, doing well, having followed the sport for a while. So that's, it is a promising showing from them, but, we've got to be careful of being too, I think...
Optimistic?
Being too optimistic at this stage. There's one race that they've done well at, but they did show some good form at Austria last weekend as well. So hopefully it's hopefully it's a turn for the better, because the more teams we have being competitive, the more interesting the racing is. And I think if we ignore what we kind of been doing the whole season, really, which is just ignoring who's winning the race, because it's always Max, it's quite actually an interesting little fight there, for basically the battle for P2 at the moment, as to who's going to win that. Because, now that McLaren's kind of entered the game, you've also had Aston Martin take a little bit of a back step. Whether that's track specific is hard to tell at this point. Both Austria, Canada, and Silverstone are all reasonably high speed circuits, so they may just be struggling with those circuits, but I'm not entirely certain. I think probably Aston Martin having a bit of a downturn, and maybe being outdeveloped by everybody else, and that initial push they haven't been able to follow that through with significant upgrades, and everybody's sort of seen what Aston Martin's done with their platform, copied a lot of it, and caught up to them basically. And we're seeing, Mercedes who've been honestly the most consistent team, I think, after Red Bull, even though they've, had a couple of downturns. They're P2 in the championship for a reason, I think, at this point, because they're very consistent in terms of they're always pretty much in the top 10. They're usually up there in the top 5 with at least one car. Mercedes seem to be, despite everybody, I guess it's weird because Mercedes was so used to seeing dominate and win so often that we keep looking at them as if they're doing badly, but they're not actually. They're actually doing quite well. So a challenger for them in McLaren is good, especially if Aston has sort of fallen off a bit. It means that we're not going to just get Red Bull Mercedes again for the rest of the season, which is good news.
That is true, but the other thing that the commentators, and you've brought up just then as well, is it a case that McLaren have caught up in development and Aston Martin has dropped away a bit? Or is it a case that the track hasn't been too agreeable? In my personal opinion, I think that possibly Aston Martin made some wrong choices in their upgrades as of late, and that everybody else has caught up.
Yeah, I think that's the most likely thing. They have fallen off pretty hard. Like, I'm not going to lie, for me as a Williams fan, it's amazing to watch Alex Albon overtake Fernando Alonso.
It was a pretty ballsy move too.
And a really good move there, from good old Alex. But it is not a good showing for the car if they're being overtaken by an admittedly quite fast Williams. The Williams doing really well at these high-speed circuits, as we know, because it's quite a low downforce. It's the only car, it's the first car we've seen in a while, probably since I can't remember what season it was. There was the Force India. It was one of their first seasons they had, and they had a ridiculously low downforce car that was just at Monza, and all that was just destroying the field. So yeah, Williams have a very low downforce car, which is doing them well at tracks like Silverstone and on Austria and tracks with nice high speed sections, lots of long straights, which is great for me as a Williams fan. Love it. Great to see them up there in the top 10 again. Really enjoying that, especially on merit as well, not sort of due to heaps of DNFs. Even Sargent managed to get P11 by the end. Thanks a bit to Sir Stroll having having a few incidents here. Every time I swear with Lance Stroll, it's every time he does something good and he sort of shows a bit of that form that we know he's capable of, he does something stupid like he does at Silverstone there and trying to knock Pierre Gasly off the track. And then also trying to say that it was weird. I watched his interview afterwards, and he was saying it was because Pierre had pushed him a bit off track earlier, and that's why he did that. It's like, what? So you're using the schoolyard? But he did it first. Defense there, Lance.
No, that's not going to fly.
That's not going to fly.
That's not going to fly.
Yeah, very strange. Yeah, it's just some of that. Lance is he's a driver that I don't want to put into a little pay driver box, and I don't want to...
Technically, he's not anymore.
Well, yeah.
Daddy runs the team.
But he's a pay driver, basically. But, I want to give Lance the benefit of the doubt, and he has shown that he's very capable Formula One driver. And just like Latifi, you don't get to Formula One if you're a bit rubbish. You have to be... Just to be able to drive one of those cars, you have to be pretty competent. And I think that... Lance is a much more competent driver than he shows us. It's just sometimes it feels like he just doesn't turn up to the race. And it doesn't feel like he turned up this time. I think Alonso did his best, but he really struggled with that car. And I'm not looking at it as a track-specific thing. I think Aston are on a downturn. I think they're getting out-developed. But we'll see once we go. We're not really going to see for the next couple of races. Hungaroring next week. Sorry, it's not next week, it's the week after. Yeah, 2 weeks to Hungaroring. That might show us a bit more of the form of Aston Martin, because that is a much higher downforce track compared to the tracks we had then. But then after that, you got Spa, which is as low downforce gets before Monza, really. So yeah, we'll have to see where Aston is, but we might not know until after the season break if this is a big downturn or if this is just, a couple of tracks that don't suit the car very well.
A couple of other things from this weekend with Formula One was the double DNF from Alpine.
Yeah.
So, not a great showing for them this weekend, and also the Haas doing Ferrari things, which caused the safety car to come out and ruin some strategy for the teams that decided to pit in just before.
Yeah, that really cost Oscar a lot, ultimately. I mean, I think... Yeah, would have been really interesting because people were sort of saying, Oscar, lost out on a podium, basically a guaranteed podium because of the safety car. But I would have liked to have seen Oscar defend from Lewis Hamilton, and we saw Lando did an awesome job, and we haven't said enough about Lando here.
No,
we should say something about Lando. Basically won the race as far as I'm concerned. Won the actual race, the race that was between the other cars besides Max Verstappen.
Widest car out there.
Yeah, he did an excellent job. Really great racing. Lando provided some of the best entertainment. Lando, and I think Alex Albon coming through the field, they were some of the highlights for me. But, that first lap, getting ahead of Max and actually fighting him for as many laps as he possibly could, doing his best with, Max was always going to get him once DRS was activated. I mean, we talked a bit about DRS last week, but once DRS was activated, you knew that Max was just going to just stream past him. And Lando probably knew that too, but the fact that he went for it, stuck it in front, gave us a show, gave the British crowd a show too, obviously, his home track. Really good. And then to also be, him and Lewis going at it after the safety car restart, that was really good racing from both of them. Really, shows that, these cars can produce good racing when we get the situations right and, the tyre strategies and all that sort of thing. But I would have liked to have seen Oscar Piastri and Hamilton do the same, have that fight. if Hamilton was behind and see, because that would have been a really good showing from Oscar if he could have held off Lewis Hamilton. Because I would like to see it, because I'm not sure if he could have. Because Lewis was pushing hard, and I think a lot of what helped Lando stay ahead there, obviously the car activating the tires really well and all that sort of stuff, but also just Lando's driving in defense there was exceptionally good and shows, the quality of driver that, we know Lando is. But could Oscar have done the same? And that's like, for a rookie to defend from a 7-time world champion, that would have been really interesting to see.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if he could have held back Lewis. I think Lewis might have bested him, just experience, but who knows? So I think rather than focusing on him being a bit robbed of a P3, I think we were just robbed of a bit of an interesting battle there. But, strategy be strategy. That's how it works sometimes. And, Oscar should be very happy with fourth. I know he'll be disappointed to not get a podium, but, I mean, to get fourth on your rookie season, that's really rare.
His time will come. His time will come for sure.
Yeah, like, it's clear that he's got the ability to run a race like that as well, I mean, the car helps a lot, but just, able to stick with Lando, able to pace himself, able to do pretty much the whole race. And, yeah, without safety car, probably would have been P3 easy. So, yeah, really good showing for Oscar.
Don't forget he had a cracker start against Verstappen too. He almost got him on the start as well.
I think that was more to do with Max struggling on the start than Oscar getting a good launch. Like, Lando got a really good launch. Oscar got a good launch too, but I think Max really just
bunkered down.
He was saying he had sort of a, in the post-race interviews, he was saying he had sort of a wheel spin issue that he's had a couple of times this season, so it's probably just something in the car that they need to sort of tweak out, minor issues with the best car in the grid, obviously. It was just good to see some good battling on track, and there was plenty of it. Silverstone generally produces good racing, honestly, so it's one of those races I always kind of look forward to, and it still delivers.
I'll just touch on one more thing with Silverstone, and that's Sergio Perez's qualifying. Fifth race in a row now that he's missed out on qualifying session 1. To be honest with you, tremendous job to get up to 6th from where he started. But is this going to be a habit you think that we'll be seeing?
Is it though? Is it a good job that he got to P6? Like, I don't want to jump on the Perez is washed bandwagon. Don't get me wrong. I think Perez hasn't always been a very good driver. But only getting to P6 in the fastest car on the grid shows either one of two things, or one of maybe three things. One, obviously, Max is just on another level to the entire field, which is fair enough, because he is. 2, the car maybe not performing as well against the competitors, like showing that the difference there isn't as much, because we didn't see the huge gaps that we've usually seen. Even before the safety car, the gap wasn't huge to Lando. Lando was keeping pace with Max pretty well.
5 to 6 seconds, I believe.
I think it was up to 10 seconds by the time the safety car had come out. Like, it had dragged out, but that's still better than what most have done. We've seen 30-second gaps by that point, So, but again, that could be a track-specific thing. But Austria wasn't too bad either. Like, the gap, to Max wasn't huge. But, yeah, whether it's the field kind of catching up with the Red Bull a bit more and the massive advantage they had at the very start of the season sort of dripping away a little bit as the rest of the team sort of develop and catch up. Maybe that's it, or it's just, I don't know, Perez just not being able to get his head in the game, Because if it is the fastest car, and it's objectively the fastest car, there's no doubt about that. Anytime anybody gets ahead of it, nobody can defend and hold on to a position from it. Like, it is just that fast. So I don't know. It's not like Silverstone's a particularly difficult track to overtake on. There's a lot of overtaking spots. That's why it's a track I like, because there is plenty of opportunities for a fast car to overtake, and without DRS even. So I don't know. Perez it's a concern. I like to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he has just been struggling with those qualifying performances and just not delivering the level I think Red Bull really needs him to. whether they're gonna ditch him and you know, do what the rumor mill wants everybody to do, which is put Ricardo in or something like that. I don't think. I don't think they're just gonna dump him. Not this season, honestly. I don't know. I don't know what to say about Perez. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
For me, following him since his Force India days, and even I believe Sauber at one point as well.
I can't remember.
He's like you said, he's in the top team, and apart from some bad luck, because let's be honest, there's been some bad luck with his qualifying as well. Kind of disappointing seeing him end up where he is in qualifying. Even not as a Red Bull fan, there's almost that expectation that he'll be further up and rear gunning for Max, even though he doesn't need it. Whether or not they'll get rid of him mid-season, I don't think so. It's too far in. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens in the silly season, because at the moment we just need one driver to start making a move for silly season to actually kick off.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if silly season. I mean, we'll find out after Spa, really, because that'll be the kind of official start of silly season, I think, for driver swaps and stuff. I'm not sure how many moves and shakes we'll see. We might see, someone like De Vries might get moved along and another junior driver get brought in, or they might put Ricardo in AlphaTauri. I don't know if they'll put Ricardo in AlphaTauri.
That's what the rumor mill is suggesting at the moment, though.
Does he want to drive for AlphaTauri? Does he want to drive? Like, that car's rubbish. Like, it's getting handily beaten now by Williams and almost Alfa Romeo. Like, Alfa Romeo are giving him a run for the money, and Alfa Romeo have not been having a good year. Haas are beating him, and Haas can't even keep their car not exploding half the races. So, I don't know. I don't know if it's a good move for Daniel Ricciardo, unless AlphaTauri is going to turn themselves around. They're comfortably in last at the moment. So
the thing I've read about AlphaTauri, or whatever they're going to be called next year, because yes, again, another name change.
Yeah.
That their technical partnership with Red Bull is actually going to increase as well.
I'm less enthusiastic about that. I dislike even the de facto relationship between Williams and Mercedes. That they're kind of like AlphaTauri is to Red Bull, Williams, Mercedes and Williams. Even that, I really dislike the each manufacturer kind of getting two teams thing in Formula One.
Like a ghost team, sort of.
Yeah, I think it should be. There should be much. I want more engine manufacturers, which we're supposed to be getting. But so far, we still only got Audi confirmed and Honda.
/ Ford.
Yes, and Ford. I guess just Ford count. So I would rather there be less of these sort of sister team things when there's only 10 teams on the grid, right? Like, I want each of those 10 teams to be unique. Yeah, exactly. I want them to be different to each other. So, yeah, I think I don't want that relationship to get closer. I want AlphaTauri to be more their own team, just like I want Williams to be their own team, and I want Alfa Romeo to be their own team. I don't want them to all be just sisters of Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull. I would like them to do their own thing a bit more.
Well, let's see it this way, right? Why not just get rid of those smaller teams and have 4-car teams, right? Because that's, apart from the technical aspect, that's essentially what's going on. The only standalone team at the current moment is Alpine Renault.
Yeah, that's it, because nobody else wants their engine. Although the engine hasn't been letting them down this season. They've just had other weird issues. But, the more manufacturers, more engine suppliers, more variety in the teams, not having that sort of de facto sister team kind of relationship that we do have with most of the teams at the moment. I would definitely like that. And it also, it's just better for the manufacturers too. Like, it doesn't look good for Mercedes at the moment when their parent team is being beaten pretty consistently, even though they're still coming second, but by
their customers. By
both of their customers now. Like, by 2 of their customers now. 2 out of 3 of their customers are beating them at the moment. It's just Williams who aren't, and yeah, let's be honest, Williams beating Mercedes isn't going to happen too often.
You never know.
Monza, maybe. Monza.
Monza will be interesting.
I'm looking forward to Monza and Spa to see what that Williams does, because they're getting Yeah, the Williams is very interesting at the moment. I mean, as a fan, obviously, I'm a bit biased there, wanting to see the Williams do well. But it is really good to see the car performing, especially because it is a slightly left of field design on it. You know, being a low drag car, um, meaning that it is a really good car in certain situations that even the best cars can't quite match. Like the only car that's really able to match it for outright pace and outright straight line speed is the Red Bull at the moment. I mean the Williams is always consistently the fastest car in the speed traps. Like it is without question on paper the fastest car in a straight line, but you know the Red Bull is able to push past and
It's able to translate it better.
yeah, it's able to translate that speed better because it can get better exits and all that kind of stuff. But it is a legitimately quick car, and it just struggles in the corners. So it'll be interesting to see how Hungary goes for it. I think Hungary they're not going to perform as well. Williams, I don't know if a top 10 is going to be possible at Hungary, depending on how well they've upgraded the car, whether they've improved their performance at those sort of high downforce circuits. Because yeah, Hungaroring's not very not a lot of straights, not a lot of advantage to use that extra top speed that they've got.
It's a much more technical track.
Yeah. But look, I'm still rooting for the team, still rooting for Alex, and maybe he can do something with it.
Okay, now we're moving on to the V8 supercars with their round at Townsville over this past weekend. 2 different winners this weekend, and a new championship leader too, which is great to see. We have Will Brown taking out race 16, which at the end of the weekend made him the new series leader. And also, finally, Shell got a win.
Well, finally Ford got a win.
Finally, Ford got a win.
I mean, technically they got the first round, but that doesn't count because they only got that by technicality. They didn't actually win on track. But
So I reckon that win for Shell is very important for the team. It's going to lift morale because, let's face it, with the other 4 teams out there, Shell, even though they developed the Gen 3 Mustang, has not had a good time with it. So that result there hopefully lifts the morale, and we continue to see those results.
yeah, I think they've struggled the most of all the Ford teams, especially considering that they were so integral in the development of the car. So it is good to see, them finally get a win. It is good to see Ford get a win finally. No matter what side of a fence you sit on, if you do sit on a fence side, it is, outright domination of one manufacturer is not ever very much good. So it is good to see some variety there and winning the race on merit too at Townsville. Not the most interesting race. Either of the races were pretty standard. It was, interesting watching, obviously, Van Gisbergen having some struggles for race 2 and having to start all the way at the back. But then, fighting his way all the way back up the field was, interesting to watch. And then we had a nice little bit of controversy at the end when the team asked him to give that position back, and he did it in the most Shane Van Gisbergen way that you possibly can, which is like just hanging the brakes right before the finish line just to show that he was doing it out of that's such a weird. I understand why they made the call, like when they say, when Triple Eight said why they wanted him to let Feeney through, because Feeney would, if Feeney got P4, he could win the round.
Yeah,
you get the round result, and that's what they wanted, which I think is fair enough. It's just, they said it was just a lack of communication. It wasn't clear enough, and they didn't get the call in early enough, so Shane didn't really understand exactly why he was having to give up the position after fighting all the way from the back of the grid. But still finished P5, so you can't complain too much.
Yeah, but the thing is, right, not a lot of people realize that racing is a team sport, right? And this is an example of that. As much as Shane has run away with race wins, and I understand he had to battle through with this particular race, but, as a team, he had to let Feeney through.
Yeah, look, I don't think there's a problem with the decision or with the call. Shane was not happy about it, but, Shane Van Gisbergen doesn't tend to be too happy with team orders whenever they're given. Honestly, it's not the first time he sort of kicked a stink about something like this. So, yeah, it is nice to see at least Triple Eight backing Feeney to some extent, and not just seeing him as the second driver. You know, when you've got a talent like Shane Van Gisbergen, obviously, you know, he's going to get priority a lot of the time. So to see them at least give, you know, Brock the
look in.
Yeah, the look in and say, you know, he gets the round victory and we want that and he should get that because he had been more consistent over the weekend. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Yeah, team orders are always going to be a tough sort of situation when it comes down to it. You know, the reality is, you know, Shane Van Gisbergen, they let him get through to see if he could catch P3 and he couldn't. So, you know, he gave the position back. And I think it was more just that they hadn't communicated that's what the plan was to him. And I think he'd already passed Feeney by the time that, by the time they hadn't given him the order that that's what they were going to do by the time he'd passed Feeney. So I don't think he was quite across the fact that he was going to have to let him through if he couldn't catch P3. And he was just kind of expecting to get P4 at that point. But anyway, a little bit of controversy, a little bit of drama. But otherwise, yeah, you know, Townsville's not the greatest circuit. Honestly, I've never particularly thought it was that fantastic. It's pretty pedestrian as far as the street circuit goes. Even I'm not a big, you know, I'm not someone who doesn't like street circuits, especially with supercars. Street circuits work really well, I think. But yeah, Townsville's just not a super interesting one, and it's a weird one that's one of the races this year that we get free to air. You know,
it was free to air.
Yeah, like so. This is one of the races that they do broadcasts on Channel 7. You know, the whole race, the qualifying, and everything. So everybody is able to watch it, which is a good step. You know, we were talking about that last week. But, yeah, it's a weird one because it's not the most exciting or interesting race. You know, it's not, you know, you kind of want to pick more iconic tracks or whatever. But anyway, we'll see how it all ends up. But, yeah, and I guess the other issue is, I mean, obviously with Ford winning, a lot of people saying, you know, well, the parity is obviously fixed and all that. But I think it's still a bit more complicated than that.
It is, and V8 Supercars have come around and said there are more changes coming. There is a test session coming up soon, and they're going to possibly try out some other alternatives as well. The recent upgrade was done to the rear wing. Some teams added essentially what is like a boot lip underneath the rear wing, while other teams have actually remodeled their rear wing. And it's, you know, obviously working, but there's still some more work to be done.
Well, according to Chaz, it doesn't work at all. That was his feedback on it. Apparently, he couldn't feel a single piece of difference in his car. I mean, he retired with he had a problem with the car in the second race. But he seemed to think that the parity's still got a long way to go because he thinks that the biggest difference, because tyre wear is a big difference between the two platforms as well. Like the Mustangs have been struggling with tyre wear more than the Camaros have, and Townsville's quite a heavy tyre wear track. Like a lot of cars doing, you know, multiple stops because the tyres were wearing off, and tyre wear was the big thing this weekend. And pretty much, if you did your tyre wear properly, that was the biggest win for you at Townsville last weekend. So yeah, some of the teams, I mean, it's hard to tell. You know, Chaz maybe just trying to get the Ford a little bit better than it is and trying to just play the game a bit. Or is it, you know, legitimately that they haven't quite got that parity right yet?
I think there is a bit of frustration coming from his end because I think after the first race, his literal comment was, you need one of those things to win.
Yeah. Yeah,
so there's a bit of vocal dissatisfaction at the moment.
Yeah. I remember when they were interviewing him after the retirement, whatever the issue was, whatever part that broke, it was a control part. And Chaz was very vocal in his interview that it was a control part. He consistently said, "Yeah, another control part issue, another control part issue." Not very, just sort of driving the point home that the thing that broke was not one of their developed parts, and it's one of the parts that they have no control over. So yeah, being very vocal. He's been pretty vocal all season though about the parity. He's been sort of one of the big talkers about it. So I don't know whether he's got his own agenda there.
We're going to move on to the juicy part of this podcast, and we're going to talk about the new Formula One calendar and how it's been extended by one round because China's back into the fold for next year.
Same issue I had this year. with the calendar. Not to do with the tracks. It's just there's too many. There's too many races. And I know some people there's a lot of content, particularly content creators and people who do YouTube content online and all that sort of thing seem to like, the amount of races we get from an entertainment perspective. I think way too many races this season, and next season's going to be worse. When you look at the calendar, it's ridiculous for me. I mean, as someone who's been watching the sport for a while, when I look at the calendar and I see there's, 24 rounds, and we start in, February?
Yes, the end of February, 29th of February to the 2nd of March in Bahrain.
Yeah, so you start in February and you don't finish until November.
No, early December.
December, sorry, that's it, right. So it's like 11 months straight, pretty much. Like, even the break isn't big in the middle there.
Yeah, they've cut down on the break.
Yeah.
So those that don't know, we have the calendar starting in Bahrain, then Saudi Arabia, Australia, Japan, China, Miami, Imola, Monaco, Canada, Spain, Austria, Silverstone, Hungary, Belgium, Netherlands, Italy again for Monza, Azerbaijan, Singapore, Austin, Mexico, Brazil, Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi at the end.
Yeah, I think it's just too many. I appreciate to an extent what they've done with the regionalization side of things, where they've tried to bring races that are geologically closer together on the calendar, but the cynic in me sees that much more as just a appeasement for people who had a complaint about that, who are bringing that up as a potential issue. Because when you look at the actual logistics of how teams get to races, if you look at the opening leg, right, where they put Suzuka and Australia together, right?
Yeah.
On paper,
Makes sense.
Makes sense, right? Because Suzuka and Australia pretty close together compared to most of the rest of the world, right? Like, you're putting all the Asian races together, basically, right? Because we basically count as Asia here in Australia. But when you look at the logistics of how they're going to do those races, it's not going to be a case of they don't. It could be worse for transport, because they're not going to go from Australia to Japan.
No.
Direct. They're going to go from, before they get to Australia, they're going to be in their home base in the UK or wherever in Europe. They're going to go to Australia. They're going to go back to Europe. Then they're going to go to Japan. Then they're going to go back to Europe. Then they're going to go to China. Like, it's not going to drastically reduce the amount of travel they do, and probably make it worse for the crews and the teams and the drivers, like, in terms of how much traveling they're doing and how much, you look at things like burnout for all the crew and all that kind of stuff. Like, honestly, the races are so close together still that the regionalization, unless they change something significantly in terms of how teams transport their things from one race to the other, I just don't see it's going to make that big a difference.
My understanding on Formula One logistics is that, for example, they'll send parts and whatever to one round, let's say the next upcoming round, and then they start organizing and start sending stuff to the round after from base as well. So that way you have two sets of parts going to two different tracks. Obviously depending on distance and all that sort of stuff. Obviously it leaves at a later date and so on. But the idea is that they get to the track with the parts there, and the cars get shipped from the previous round.
Mm. Yeah, from it, like, moving parts and mechanical machinery and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, that's there's always ways you can improve that and make that so that you're doing it, and they can put restrictions on that. But I think I'm looking at it more from the perspective of personnel.
Yeah.
Personnel need to get, they need to go home. Yeah, so I think it's an issue with personnel. People getting from point A to point B, and transporting those, because you can't pre-send a person from one place to the other. They're going to want to go home. They're going to want to see their families and all that. And I know the argument is, it's like, oh well, it's a very privileged organization to be part of. It's you paid a lot of money and all that sort of stuff. But
everybody burns out though.
Everybody burns out at some point. And you need to ensure that people are well rested, to ensure they're performing at their best. And whether it's the drivers or whether it's the pit crew or anybody catering people, right? Like, you want everyone to be, performing at 100%. And I think we prioritized the entertainment side of it too much with this new calendar, even with this year as well. And like, even as a fan, like watching this year so far, it's just so much racing. Like I never thought I'd say this.
Race fans complaining about too much racing.
Yeah. Like you wouldn't think that would be the thing, right? That you're you're complaining. It's it's too many races, but it is almost like that. It's like almost every weekend. You're watching Formula One, which is great. I like Formula One. I like to watch races, but
but it's watching race. Max wins. Like,
I think maybe that influences it a little bit, just because of the dominance we're seeing. But I don't think even if we had maybe if there was like a different winner every weekend or something like that, that might be making it more interesting to follow. But even from my perspective of just burning out a little bit, of just like, you're constantly watching it, and by the time especially here in Australia, because sometimes we don't get to watch every single race live because the time zones don't work.
The American rounds.
Yeah, the American rounds for us are really bad. And some of the night rounds at some of the Middle Eastern tracks, it's 4 a.m. or something like that on a Monday for us, so you don't always get to watch the race live, which means sometimes, you're not watching the race until, Monday evening or sometimes Tuesday, depends on what your day is like.
Or the YouTube highlights.
Yeah, or you just watch the YouTube highlights, and by the time you've, even with things like, I listen to other podcasts and things like that and listen to the news and, and keep up to date with things. And it seems like, by the time you've finished, thinking about the last round, the next round's just about to kick off already. You're already talking about, free practice 1 before you've even, fully understood what happened at the last race, So I think there needs to be more breaks between the races. I would very much support a season that's a lot shorter, like significantly shorter. Like 15 rounds for me, I think is a nice number. I think there needs to be more breaks between, you need to, you need some breathing room in there. You need to create anticipation between the races. You build up slowly, talk about what's happening. I want there to be a bit more mystery about where Aston Martin's sitting and where McLaren's sitting, with their recent upgrades and things like that. How much better are they? And also for the teams to be able to fully, develop the ideas that they're putting in, to be able to take a result like McLaren, to walk away from Silverstone and take that result and see what they can do
digest it a bit further.
Yeah, like they've only got a couple of weeks now to sort of divulge that information, figure it out, and plan for the next round, And I think it would create better racing if we gave the drivers more simulator time. We gave the drivers more of a break in between, more chance to reflect on the previous race rather than just race. Then next week we're going again. So yeah, I think way too many things too close together.
All right, I'm going to use that discussion to segue into the main body of our podcast, right? And we had a bit of a discussion about this before starting this episode, and we're going to voice our opinion. Top 5 tracks, current calendar.
Yeah. So how we'll do this is it's like I'll start with my 5th track, and you'll give the 5th track, and then we'll go up the order here, and we don't know what each other's chosen, so it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see.
Might have an argument
if there's any crossover, or if there's any agreement, or how close we come together. That'll be interested. My list is reasonably. These are my top 5 tracks. They're kind of in order, but the order is not too specific, honestly.
Not defined.
Yeah, the top track I think is pretty obvious for me, but. Yeah, any of these tracks could kind of go up and down in my order, but we'll start with
number 5.
We'll start with number 5. So yeah, it is Silverstone, which that's my number 5. Silverstone, it's the history of Silverstone is really nice. It's really rich. It's been around for a while. It's the oldest, most consistently run Formula One track. But more than just that, it's a track that has not only been able to change and evolve with the sport in a successful way, not really losing what makes the track interesting, but generally always gives us good racing, no matter what kind of cars there are, no matter who's on the field and all that kind of stuff. We saw that on the weekend, that it can produce really good racing, good overtaking potential. It's fast, but it's not a short track. It's got lots of open space, but there's enough room for the cars to go around and bounce around each other while still being able to get close. I love the flow of the track. And again, this is, I suppose to specify as well, these tracks that we're picking, we are picking our favorite track for Formula One.
Yes.
Silverstone is, it's a good track for most cars though as well. I will say.
Tin Tops love it too.
Yeah, like it's a good track just overall for any motor racing, but I think even for Formula One, it's always, whether it's just because of the history and the event they make out of it and all that kind of stuff, it's always a great race. Even if it's a bit of a dull season or something, Silverstone usually delivers the results. So that's why it's my number 5.
My number 5, and you might disagree on this one, Yas Marina.
Okay, yeah, I definitely do.
For me, Yas Marina, I love the technicality of it. Yes, there's a lot of 90-degree turns, but I don't know. I just like that back end stretch. Even though I'm not a fan of DRS, it's a decent DRS spot, and a lot of like overtaking opportunities in corners, some hairpins here and there. I just like it. It's a good mix. I'm not a massive fan of the Tilke tracks, but that's probably up there for me. Yeah,
I think he does a pretty good job. And yeah, look, I'd say Yas Marina is it's a pretty good circuit. It's not in my top 5, but yeah, it's not a bad one. I don't hate it. It's a bit meh for me.
Number 4.
All right, so moving on to number 4, and I swear I'm not just going backwards in the race order here, but Canada is my number 4, which is probably an interesting one for a lot of people. Again, the history of Canada is a big part of it for me. Lots of great moments there. Lots of great races have been at Canada. Again, I like the high speed. I do have a preference for a lot of the high speed circuits. Canada again, it's a nice mixture of a street circuit style, but still open enough that you can get some good racing. It's still wide enough.
It's like semi-permanent.
Yeah, semi-permanent track. It's good. I don't know. It's hard for me to specifically say what it is about Canada. It was actually one of the ones that was I was sort of umming and ahhing about putting it on the list, but it's a track I always enjoy racing at, and I think generally it produces good racing. The straight gives opportunity for cars to, catch up to each other and stay close to each other. You've got the nice big hairpin at the back, where cars get really close and all that. It doesn't always produce the most overtakes or the greatest close battle racing, but the technicality of the track's really interesting.
It's a strategy track as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of strategy there. The weather always plays a part. I mean, that's something about Silverstone I wanted to mention that I forgot as well. I like those tracks that, usually weather comes into play a bit. Silverstone's like that, and Canada is a bit like that too, where it can often rain. And I think we just had so many cool moments there as well that it's just, I don't know, it's just a bias. It holds a special place for me.
Canada's in my list as well. Probably a little further up, but I'll put it as number 4. Same reasons. It's produced a lot of memorable moments. You have the Wall of Champions. Who can ever forget Kubica's massive off before the hairpin? That is like embedded in my mind. But also the midsection of that track where you have those series of S-bends.
Yeah.
It's
just a good flow,
It has a nice flow, and that's why I like racing on it myself. It just has this nice feel to it. Yeah,
it's always one of the tracks I really enjoy when I play, the F1 games or Assetto Corsa or anything like that. Yeah, so Canada, good one.
Number 3.
This might be controversial. I don't know. Number 3 for me is Monaco.
Yeah?
So Monaco, it's a circuit that it's always sort of people saying, look, if you look at Monaco, you say it doesn't suit Formula One anymore, right? Like people, it's too tight, it's too twisty, the cars are too big.
I call rubbish on that.
There's no overtaking, it's a boring race most of the time, everyone will say. It's like, And look, I don't disagree with that. And Monaco is a track that sort of, unlike the two tracks we sort of mentioned already, and even Yas Marina, it's not a track where racing is the spectacle. It is a track where qualifying is really the spectacle, and where individual driver performance is really prominent. And I think it's okay to have tracks like Monaco in the calendar. For a variety. Not every track should just be about a track that's, producing lots of overtakes and close racing. Some tracks it's about, testing the driver against the track, testing the driver against the conditions, I think Monaco does that really well. It really does show the drivers who are, the most capable.
Most adaptable.
Most adaptable, right? How do you deal with it? How do you do your strategy? Monaco, everyone says, Monaco race is always boring. I always find Monaco really interesting because, a little bit of rain, we saw it this year, just that little bit of rain just completely changes the strategy and can almost turn the race, you know. It's fast, it's dangerous still, it's probably the most dangerous track we still go to in Formula One. There's always a chance of someone binning it in qualifying, causing a red flag. I think it's a dramatic track. There's so much history there. There's been so many great moments at Monaco that even though it's not a track where you're going to see the best racing all the time, I don't want it to go away. I love Monaco. Every year it comes up. It's one of the races I always look forward to, and I think it's just because I don't mind that it's not always about the racing.
No.
Sometimes it's about the qualifying and seeing just how fast people can go and how close people can get to the walls. And I think the spectacle of Monaco is just what gets it there.
As much as I love Monaco as well, because as you said, it's not so much a race, but it showcases qualifying. And there's a lot of teams out there that are more qualifying teams than racing teams, right? And it highlights them, but unfortunately, it's not on my list. As much as I like it, it's not on my list.
Yeah, but I expect that from most people, honestly.
Bear in mind, I love the track, I love watching it, but I just feel, and this might be a bit controversial, Budapest.
Okay.
It's a technical track. It's a highly technical track. You have elevation change in there as well. You have that run up to the first corner, which is a fairly tight corner for Formula One, right? That right hand there that then goes downhill. A lot of cars have been caught out, and it's always interesting to see them how they approach that first corner. It's a track that was built by the Soviet Union as well, so there's that weird history quirk with it. But it's produced some great racing. It's a technical circuit. I like it. Even in the F1 games, if I'm gonna jump on, I'll usually do a couple of laps of Budapest as well. Weather comes into that track a fair bit as well.
Yes, yeah, it always does. Look, not one on my list, and not one that honestly really came as a consideration. Budapest is sort of one of those tracks that's just sort of like it's not bad, it's not good. It's just I don't know. I wouldn't want to see it go, but it's just not one that stands out to me, so it didn't make my top 5.
Number 2.
So number 2 for me is I'm denied about this, but it has to be on my list, and it's Suzuka.
Yep.
Suzuka is I love Suzuka as a track. It sort of goes up and down as to whether it produces a good race or not. Sometimes it is just a bit of a procession there. It's weird now that it's going to be placed earlier. Maybe it won't be as good because it's always sort of been later in the season, which has made it sort of an interesting track because it's kind of a season-deciding track. It's usually a championship winning round or something like that. So you usually get pretty interesting racing there. I just love the layout. Yeah. I love the corners. I love, the turn 1, that big bank turn, into the S's there, into that complicated section all the way through sector 1. And then, it's a figure 8 track. There's not many figure 8 tracks left in the racing world.
It's a very old school track, too. That's what people forget as well. This track was, 60s maybe? 60s?
Yeah, it's been around for a while. And
the flow of it is just, Yeah,
it's just such a fun flowing circuit, but it's also, it's still modern enough. It's very similar to Silverstone, I guess, in that way, in that it's got that tradition there. But it's managed to stay up to date with the times. so many amazing races have happened at Suzuka, and yeah, it's a good showing for it. And I just love the layout of the track. Figure eight tracks are, I just love figure eight. I think it's cool watching cars go underneath while going on top. It's just,
Yeah.
it's a fun thing, you know, and it's a spectacle, and it means you can kind of see the whole layout of the track as well from certain parts of the stand. And it's one of those tracks that's, you know, sort of on my list to actually go to for sure.
I think you're going to disagree with my number 2,
Uh-huh.
Spa.
Yeah, I am, because
Yep.
I hate Spa. Spa is not on my list, but anybody who knows me will know why that Spa is not on my list. But
Look,
begin, and then I'll start my rant.
I love the uphill. I love the downhill. You know, after going up through Radley-on and down through that complex in the midfield, having to get that line through there consistently is a challenge. Whether, you know, even though unfortunately it has proven lethal at times. But, you know, it's the history of it. It's the flow of it. I love the flow of the track. It's produced some great moments as well, you know, like Danny Rick overtaking, going up the hill. And I could just watch YouTube videos over and over again of a camera posted at the base of that hill and just seeing these cars just fly past one after each other. Memorable moments. And yeah, I just like the track. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. I'm very much in the minority, hating Spa. Spa is just not a track that I think is any good anymore. I think it used to be a nice track. I think it used to be a cool track. I think it's unlike, say, Silverstone or Suzuka, which I think have modernized well and have maintained their relevance. All the things that made it really great originally. You know, the original layout of Spa is just
The one through town.
Yeah. That's an amazing layout. You know, that's my favorite track in the old Grand Prix Legends game. You know, was to go to Classic Spa,
Yeah.
in 60 Spa.
We've done a few laps.
Yeah, that's such an amazing track. You're going through the countryside and all that sort of stuff. But you know, obviously that was never going to last, and they had to shorten the track and make it safer and all that kind of thing. And that's completely understandable. But I think, you know, they kind of had Spa was okay sort of in the early 90s, and then they, you know, when they added the bus stop, and then that was like, this isn't great, but it's still not too bad. And then they changed it again to slow the cars down even more. I think the flow of the track, especially in that final sector, I hate it. I think it
is very disruptive.
It's very disruptive, and it doesn't flow at that point. I think it's a bit antiquated, and like I said, Rouge Radeon, overrated complex corners. It's sort of I guess it's kind of similar to Monaco in that way, where it's sort of a test of skill, of bravery, of how fast you can take that corner. But I also think that that's part of what makes it so dangerous, and what has caused so many incidents there is, yeah, if you're not pushing the car to make it go as flat out as you possibly can, you're going to lose massive amounts of lap time there going up onto the straight. And you know, that run onto the Camel Straight, if you're a little bit slower, like if you lose, you know, 2 or 3 kilometers through a Rouge Radeon, you're losing tons of speed down the end of the Camel Straight.
Yep.
And I think it's just so dangerous that we make drivers push that hard through a corner complex like that. Like, it's great spectacle, and it's great to watch. And maybe, yeah, this does sound a bit weird considering how much I love Monaco and the danger that track brings. But I think, I don't know. It's a
different type of danger, though.
Yeah, I've just never thought that it was a risk that's worth the spectacle, Spa. And yeah, I mean, so many times the track gets rained out, and I don't know. I just find it boring. I just find Spa is always a pretty boring race, Formula One or other tracks. You know, the Spa 24-hour is okay, because it's an endurance race, so it's a completely different kind of challenge. And it's more about, you know,
attrition and
yeah, exactly. Like endurance racing is one of those things that it's more about that attrition and all that, right? So I think Spa is okay there, and circuits that work for a 24-hour race don't necessarily work for Formula One cars in a sprint. So yeah, no, it's definitely not on my list.
Number 1.
I said number 1 for me. I don't know how popular this will be or how typical this will be, but
let's hear it.
For me, it's Brazil.
Yeah, that to be honest, it came close for me.
So not on your list.
No, but it came like close.
Okay. I love Brazil. I think Brazil is one of the best classic kind of circuits that we still go to, even though it's not been in Formula One for as long as something like Silverstone or whatever. I love the layout of the track. There's enough technical sections. There's enough straights. It's a bit of an equalizer a lot of the time in cars. Cars that perform well at Brazil aren't always the same cars that are performing well throughout the championship, because it's sort of a weird layout. It is sort of it looks like a typical high downforce kind of circuit, but it's got enough of a straight. It's got enough fast sections. There's enough opportunities for overtaking. It's narrow, but it's not so narrow that cars can't fit between.
It's like just enough.
Yeah, it's like just enough. You see a lot of bold, daring kind of moves. I love the way it flows through the uphill section onto the main straight there. That main straight is
like
amazing.
That massive curve.
Yeah, that big long curve. It's just such a great. And then you go into the chicane. That first turn chicane.
That downhill chicane, yeah.
Yeah, like watching cars go through there, it's always fantastic. I think it's produced some of the best races, some amazingly memorable moments, particularly with Senna driving at Brazil. It's just a circuit that, I don't know, I always look forward to Brazil the same way I always sort of look forward to, Monaco. And it's just one of those tracks that I think it always produces really interesting races, and I think the layout's really nice, and I think it suits Formula One cars really well. It's my favorite. I love Brazil.
Brazil for me does hold a special spot, but it's not on the list for me. I think my number one is so stereotypical. Monza.
See, okay. Well, see, Monza's one of those tracks where it's a bit divisive, I find, because I like Monza. As a track, just that high speed thing, and you always it's always sort of a bit of a wild card track in a season, because
the Verstappen-Hamilton tangle is a good example of that.
Yeah, but it's the track that seems to produce the most unlikely winners as well. Like it's a track where, just the nature of it can produce Williams has been doing well there the last couple of years. They'll probably do well there this year if the car continues to perform the way it has been. Being that sort of really, it's so fast. It's such a fast circuit, And it's I love the old layout of Monza, obviously.
The double loop.
The original double loop, oval kind of thing. That's a great track. But definitely not practical for cars these days. But Monza's one of those ones where it's like, I definitely don't hate it, but I find that it can produce an interesting race sometimes, but a lot of the time it is very much just the race itself can be quite boring. I find at Monza, the racing it can be boring.
For me, Monza's on there because the layout's awesome. It's high speed, high percentage on full throttle. The S-bends at the end of the straight always produces something interesting, whether it's at the start of the race, the middle of the race, or near the end of the race. And given where it is in Italy, weather comes to play a fair bit at Monza too. The amount of wet races Monza's had is a fair amount. And it's where rookies tend to cut their teeth a fair bit too. It's the history side, it's old school, and that's why I like Monza. It's always interesting to see, like you said, for example, the Williams come to play, basically, that's my number one. What I want to do now is, originally I set it to 5, but I'm going to change it to 3. Your 3 favorite non-calendar tracks.
How far back can we go?
Let's 80s. Let's go 80s onwards.
Yep.
Because maybe if we waffle on about old Spa, people won't
Well,
know what
we weren't
about.
alive before the 80s, so I mean...
Just.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, sure. Okay. If I'm looking at tracks from the past, or tracks that have been on the calendar before but aren't on there anymore that I want to bring back, and this is an easy one because we can just swap a race for it really simply.
Yep.
We need to bring Adelaide back. I hate Albert Park with a passion. I think Albert Park is the most boring circuit
Even with the changes?
on the calendar, and I hate that it's the Australian race. Yeah, it's a bit better now, a little bit better. I just think it's boring. I don't like the track layout. I think Albert Park's just meh, and I hate that it's the Australian race. And we have Adelaide. It's an amazing... Yeah, people are like, oh, there's too many street circuits. But Adelaide is an awesome street circuit. And yeah, maybe it's a bit tight for Formula One cars these days. You know, maybe they need to widen it just a little bit.
To be honest with you, it's tight for V8 supercars too.
Yeah, it's just, I love races, all the races at Adelaide. It being the last, when it used to be the last round of the season.
There was the hype.
There was always, you know, especially in the old days, because championships usually went pretty close to the wire. Yeah, because of the way the points worked and just reliability and all that kind of stuff. I think Adelaide's an awesome track layout. I'm so glad that it's back for supercars now. That was tragic.
It's half layout though.
Yeah. I want that original layout of
double step.
Yeah, I want that original Adelaide back. That's the track that I miss the most. Because yeah, it was just. It's also just I just don't like Albert Park that much, and I get it. Adelaide's not as nice for people to go to as Melbourne is, but who cares about that? We go to the good racetracks. Don't take people to good racetracks. Don't take people to.
Do you know what we're going to do one year?
Yeah.
Go to the Adelaide Festival of Speed.
Yeah.
Which they do use the old layout.
Yeah, they do use that. Yeah.
And this year they brought out some of the old F1 cars too. We're talking like the Saudi Arabia Williams.
Yeah. Yeah. Look.
Yeah.
If there's a track, that's. We're not going in order here. Sorry,
no.
But that's my number one. Yeah, because yeah.
For me, it's the old Hockenheimring.
Yeah.
When they went through the Black Forest.
That'd probably be my number two or something as well. Yeah. The old Hockenheimring.
Footage, just the footage. That's one thing I remember from my childhood is staying up, turning the TV on while my folks are asleep.
Yeah.
And just watching these cars go through the forest. I can just imagine sitting at the end of that massive straight and hearing these V10, V12 monsters just scream through the forest. You don't see them.
Yeah.
But just screaming. And I can understand why they've cut that section out. It was a safety risk where the marshals and the, fire and medical couldn't get to the cars in a quick enough fashion.
Yeah, it's similar to Nürburgring in that way. Yeah.
But I don't know. There's a romantic aspect to that. It's just the driver. There's no grandstands. It's a forest. Yeah.
Definitely. No. I 100% agree with that. That'd be on my list as well. Yeah, the old Hockenheim is just there's that big long forest section. Yeah, definitely. Circuits we don't race, maybe a more modern one, maybe just less of a historical one, would be Sepang, I think. That was a really cool circuit. I always want to see more Asian circuits around. Yeah. And really nice layout there. And yeah, it's one that I always thought it was good racing there, and it's a shame that we don't race there anymore. So Sepang, I think, would be my third choice.
When I heard it was cut, I was actually surprised all those years ago.
Yeah.
Because it's always produced good racing. I think the argument was the weather.
Yes.
The weather was the partial of that argument.
Well, that's why they had the special
monsoon.
Yeah, they could have just
monsoon tire.
Could have just called those the Sepang tires, because they didn't really use them. They sometimes use them
maybe
at
Brazil.
And Singapore.
Yeah.
Singapore usually use those. Sepang would be another one. Yeah, I'd like to see that. India was a good track as well. If we're talking about Asian tracks.
The problem with me is India doesn't stand out. I don't even remember the layout for that track.
That was nice. I liked India. That was a good track. Yeah.
Even Shanghai, I'm not a fan of.
Yeah, it is
complex.
It is a bit of a weird layout. But I'm okay with that.
So I think that wraps everything up, right? Like last time, if you want to get involved in motorsport and volunteer with flagging or some sort of officiating, be sure to check out Motorsports Australia or just chat to your local track or racing club. Thanks for listening in, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, as always, cheers for listening in. We're putting the podcast on different platforms and things like that. Currently, we are on Spotify, and we're also on Amazon, and we should be on Google reasonably soon. Hopefully by the time this episode comes out, but their approval process is a bit longer than others, and looking to get Apple Podcasts as well, just so we're out on whatever platforms people do. But you can always find us on YouTube. Be sure to follow us, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as well as leaving your feedback, you can also, let us know what your favorite tracks are. If you've got any tracks that you want to come and see, it'd be interesting to see what you guys are all about. So cheers everybody for listening, and we will see you next time.
Hooroo.